What if one simple act of kindness could change an entire life? That's exactly what happened when a struggling mechanic, drowning in bills and heartbreak, found hope in the most unexpected way. A stranger walked into his shop and did something so unbelievable, it turned his world upside down. In the heart of Austin, Texas, Ethan Walker owns a small auto repair shop. Once a bustling neighborhood staple, now stood on the verge of collapse. The garage smelled of oil, metal, and faded hopes, its shelves cluttered with old tools. Business had slowed to a trickle, leaving Ethan working longer hours for dwindling pay. But the heaviest burden he carried was his wife, Sarah's illness. Diagnosed with a rare degenerative disease, Sarah had gone from being his partner in both life and business to being almost entirely dependent on him. The medical bills mounted faster than he could pay them, and with each passing day, Ethan felt himself slipping further into exhaustion. Every morning he dragged himself out of bed at 4 a.m., slipping into his grease-stained coveralls, hoping that today would be different. But it never was. Fewer customers, more unpaid invoices, and the constant weight of uncertainty. He'd long abandoned the idea of taking a break, let alone a day off, because every minute spent away from the garage meant less money for Sarah's treatments. Yet, despite everything, he refused to quit. He had built this shop with his own hands, and he wouldn't let it slip away, no matter how impossible things seemed. Hope felt like a luxury he could no longer afford, but deep down, a small part of him still wished for a miracle. And that miracle would soon walk through his shop's doors in the most unexpected way. The morning unfolded just like every other, quiet, slow, and heavy with uncertainty. Ethan arrived at the garage before dawn, the neon Walker Auto Repair sign flickering weakly above the entrance, much like his fading hope. He unlocked the rusted metal doors, flipped the open sign and stepped inside, greeted only by the familiar scent of motor oil and steel. Dust particles danced in the early sunlight, filtering through the shop's grimy windows, landing on the half-fixed Chevy truck sitting on the lift. A job postponed because the customer had yet to pay. Ethan wiped his grease-stained hands on his faded coveralls and sighed. It was getting harder to stay afloat. He brewed a cheap pot of coffee, not because he liked the taste, but because he needed something to keep him going. The shop phone hadn't rung in days, and his last job barely covered the cost of supplies. His mind wandered to Sarah. Was she awake yet? Was she in pain? He pushed the thoughts aside. Thinking too much made the weight on his shoulders unbearable. He needed customers, work, income. Anything to keep the business alive. But as he gazed out the large window facing the street, all he saw was emptiness. No cars pulling in. No customers seeking repairs. What he didn't know was that fate had already decided this would be no ordinary day. The sound of approaching footsteps on the pavement caught his attention, and a shadow appeared outside his door. The bell above the shop door jingled, a sound Ethan hadn't heard nearly enough these days. A tall young man in a black hoodie and jeans stepped inside, his movements unhurried yet deliberate. He didn't look like a local. There was something about the way he carried himself, calm, confident, yet oddly reserved. His sharp blue eyes flicked around the shop, taking in the worn-out tools, the scattered invoices on the counter, the tired mechanic standing behind it. Ethan wiped his hands on his rag, offering a practiced smile. "Morning. What can I do for you?" The young man nodded in acknowledgement, but didn't respond immediately. Instead, he continued scanning the shop, as if deciding something far more important than a simple car repair. It wasn't the usual hurried, impatient behavior of someone looking for a quick fix. This man was here for something else. Ethan, though exhausted, felt his curiosity stir. People didn't usually walk into an auto shop unless they needed something specific, a new battery, a brake pad replacement, maybe a tire rotation. But this stranger wasn't holding keys, wasn't glancing at a parked vehicle outside. He wasn't here for a repair. The young man finally turned his gaze to Ethan, his expression unreadable yet oddly calm. "How much for all the spare tires you have in stock?" he asked, his voice steady, as if he had just ordered a cup of coffee instead of making one of the strangest requests Ethan had ever heard. Ethan blinked, unsure if he had misheard. "All of them?" he repeated, resting his hands on the counter. His shop wasn't exactly a warehouse, but he still had at least a couple dozen tires stacked in the back, from all-season to off-road models. "You opening up a tire shop or something?" he asked, half joking, trying to gauge if this guy was serious. The stranger didn't laugh, he simply nodded. "Just need them. Name your price." Ethan hesitated. People didn't just walk in and buy every tire in stock. It didn't make sense. He had seen plenty of scams before, folks paying with bad checks, people pretending to need repairs just to get a free diagnosis. But something about this man felt different. There was no hesitation, no bargaining, just a quiet certainty in his voice. Ethan crossed his arms, narrowing his eyes slightly. "You got a car that needs all these tires?" The young man simply smiled, not cocky, not impatient, just knowing. "Let's just say I have my reasons." And for some reason Ethan couldn't explain, he found himself believing him. Ethan named the price, half expecting the young man to balk at the number, but instead of negotiating, the stranger simply nodded and reached into his pocket, pulling out a sleek black wallet. A moment later he placed a credit card on the counter with the same calm certainty that had unsettled Ethan from the start. Ethan hesitated as he took the card, glancing at the name embossed on it. Barron Trump. The name struck something in his memory, but he pushed the thought aside. He had more pressing concerns, like whether this was actually happening. As he swiped the card and waited for the transaction to process, his mind raced. Why would someone like him need every tire in a struggling garage? It didn't make sense. When the receipt printed, Ethan handed it over, expecting the moment to end there. But then, Barron reached into his pocket again, this time pulling out a small envelope and sliding it across the counter. "This is for you," he said, his voice still calm, still steady. Ethan frowned, wiping his hands on his coveralls before picking it up. "What is it?" Barron's expression didn't change. "Open it later, and take the day off." Then, with a nod, he turned toward the door, leaving Ethan standing there, envelope in hand, heart pounding, for reasons he couldn't explain. Ethan stood frozen, staring at the envelope in his grease-streaked hands. Something about it felt heavier than it should, like it carried more than just paper inside. His breath hitched as he pulled out a thick stack of cash, crisp, freshly counted bills. Tucked between them was a small handwritten note, the ink bold yet smooth, as if written with quiet purpose. "Ethan, your hard work and dedication remind me of what truly matters in life. Use this for your wife, your shop, or just to breathe for a moment. Take the day off. You deserve it. All the best, Barron." Ethan's hands trembled as he counted the money. $10,000. He sank onto the stool, his mind struggling to process what had just happened. $10,000. Enough to cover Sarah's next round of treatments, pay off overdue shop expenses, and still leave something extra for once. He swallowed hard, his throat tightening with emotion. Why? Why would a complete stranger do this? He had spent years believing that no one handed out miracles, that life was nothing but hard work and survival, and yet, here it was. For the first time in years, Ethan felt something loosen in his chest. Not just relief, but something he had almost forgotten. Hope. Ethan sat there, the envelope still clutched in his trembling hands, his mind struggling to catch up with reality. $10,000. It wasn't just money. It was a lifeline, a second chance, a breath of air when he'd been drowning for so long. His eyes flicked back to the note, reading Barron's words again, as if trying to convince himself that this was real. Take the day off. A simple sentence, yet it felt foreign to him. When was the last time he had done that? When was the last time he had even considered it? And then it hit him. Sarah. For months he had come home exhausted, barely able to keep his eyes open as he sat beside her. He had spent so much time fighting to keep the shop afloat, he had almost forgotten what it felt like to just be with her, not as a caretaker, not as a man consumed by worry, but as her husband. In that moment, the weight of years of struggle collided with an act of kindness so profound, it cracked something open inside him. Ethan pressed the envelope against his forehead, exhaling shakily. For the first time in years, Ethan did something he never thought he would. He flipped the open sign to closed. He locked up the shop and slid into his truck, the engine rumbling beneath him as he reached for his phone. His thumb hovered over Sarah's number, hesitation creeping in. What would he even say? That a stranger had walked in and bought every tire in stock? That this same stranger had left him enough money to keep the shop afloat and give Sarah the care she needed? Even as he replayed it in his head, it sounded unbelievable. By the time he pulled into the driveway of their small house, his hands were gripping the steering wheel tighter than usual. He took a deep breath, grabbed the envelope, and stepped inside. Sarah was in her usual spot by the window, bundled in a blanket, her gaze soft but tired. When she saw him, her brows knitted in confusion. "Ethan, what are you doing home?" He knelt beside her, taking her frail hand in his voice thick with emotion. Something incredible happened today, and for the first time in a long, long time, he finally believed it. The next morning, Ethan unlocked the garage. As he pulled up the metal shutter, he froze in place. A line of customers stretched down the block, people standing by their cars, some holding coffee, others chatting amongst themselves. Ethan blinked, convinced it was a mistake. Maybe there was some sort of event nearby, maybe they were waiting for something else. Then a woman near the front smiled and stepped forward. "Are you Ethan Walker?" He hesitated, wiping his hands on his coveralls. "Yeah?" Her smile widened. "We heard about what that young man did for you. About your wife. About your shop." She reached into her bag and pulled out a check, handing it to him. "This is to help. And I need my car serviced while I'm here." Ethan looked down at the check, his breath catching. $500. Not for a repair, just to help. And she wasn't the only one. The news had spread. Someone in the shop the day before had witnessed the moment and shared the story on social media. People wanted to support him. The shop, once on the brink of closing, was suddenly full of customers, kindness, and hope. For the first time in years, Ethan's register rang non-stop. Barron Trump's act of generosity had started something bigger than either of them had ever imagined. Within days, Walker Auto Repair became a symbol of hope. Customers weren't just coming in for oil changes and tire rotations, they came to offer support. Some dropped off donations, others prepaid for repairs they didn't even need, just to help keep the business afloat. Local businesses reached out, offering discounted parts, free advertising, and even volunteers to help with extra work. For the first time in years, Ethan wasn't just surviving, he was thriving. But it wasn't just about the money. Something had shifted. People started sharing their own stories, opening up about their struggles, about how they too had felt forgotten or beaten down by life. Customers who had once been strangers were now looking out for one another, swapping contacts for job leads, chipping in to help single parents with car troubles, or simply reminding each other that kindness still existed. One simple act of generosity had turned into a movement. Barron Trump had given him more than just money. He had given him back his faith in people. Ethan knew he couldn't let this moment pass without doing something to honor the kindness he had received. He started small, offering free tune-ups for struggling families, discounting repairs for seniors, and quietly fixing cars for those who couldn't afford it. What once felt like an impossible burden now felt like a responsibility. A chance to give back, just as Barron Trump had given to him. Word spread fast. People weren't just coming to Walker Auto Repair for service anymore. They came because they knew this was a place where helping others mattered. A single mother who couldn't afford new brake pads found her car fixed no charge. A veteran whose truck had been sitting dead for months finally got back on the road thanks to Ethan's generosity. Each small act carried forward the same message. Kindness wasn't just a gift, it was a chain reaction. One evening, as Ethan prepared to close up the shop, he noticed a young boy lingering near the entrance, his clothes slightly worn, his gaze hesitant. Ethan walked over, crouching to meet the boy's eyes. "Need something, kid?" he asked gently. The boy nodded, glancing at his rusted bicycle. Without hesitation, Ethan wheeled it into the garage and got to work. As he tightened the last bolt, he handed the bike back with a smile. All set, no charge. The boy's face lit up with pure joy. At that moment, Ethan realized kindness wasn't just about receiving, it was about passing it on. Ethan still worked long hours, but now his heart was lighter. The shop wasn't just a business anymore, it was a reminder of the power of generosity. Barron Trump's note now hung in a frame by the register, its message clear to every customer who walked in. Beneath it, a small plaque read, "Kindness doesn't just change a moment, it changes lives." As he wiped his hands on his coveralls, watching customers chat and laugh, Ethan smiled. Life was still unpredictable, but he no longer feared it, because now he understood one good deed could spark 1,000 more. The story of Ethan Walker teaches a profound lesson about the ripple effect of kindness, how one act of generosity can change lives in ways we never expect. Before Barron Trump walked into his shop, Ethan had resigned himself to a life of struggle, believing that hard work alone was his only path forward. He had no time to hope, no space to believe in miracles, but one simple act, a stranger recognizing his efforts and lending a hand, shifted his entire perspective. The lesson is clear. Kindness is not just a momentary gesture, it's a force that carries forward. Barron's selfless act didn't just save Ethan's business, it reignited his faith in people, encouraged his community to rally around him, and ultimately inspired Ethan to pay it forward. It proved that sometimes, when life feels overwhelming, we just need someone to remind us that we're not alone. More importantly, the story highlights that kindness doesn't have to be grand to be meaningful. Whether it's helping a struggling neighbor, fixing a kid's bicycle, or simply offering support, every act of goodness has the power to spread. In a world that can feel cold, being the spark of warmth for someone else might just be the most important thing we ever do.